Sexual Assault Services Specialist. Erica Blackwood will be joining us. She's having some internet issues, so as soon as she works that out, she will come in. But I figured I would just get us started so we don't take up any more time. So as well, I guess first, everyone knows that they're in the right training. We're here for the cultural competency training today. And we're going to just be talking more about what does it mean to be culturally competent, and also as a program, what can you do as far as creating culturally inclusive or culturally competent goals for your organization. Next slide. So as always, we're going to start our presentation with a little bit about NC CASA. So the North Carolina Coalition Against Sexual Assault is an inclusive statewide alliance working to end sexual violence through education, advocacy, and legislation. Next slide. NC CASA as a statewide coalition uses a social justice framework. Therefore, our work is done from a strong intersectional social justice perspective. By centering our work around marginalized communities, everyone is served. Our work includes our training institute, which this is part of, supporting our local rape crisis centers, resource sharing and technical assistance, our legislative agenda and policy change, anti-human trafficking outreach, prevention education, colleges and universities outreach and technical assistance, and also our language services. Although most reported sexual assault survivors are women who are assaulted by men, survivors who are not cisgender women or whose assailants are not men are often marginalized from anti-sexual violence advocacy. And to demonstrate our efforts to center survivors who may be on the margins of this work, we use gender-neutral language to talk about survivors and harm doers. So keeping in mind, anyone can be a victim and anyone can be a harm doer. Just a moment, Erica's having some registration issues. Okay, sorry folks. And so this training is meant to be a space for learning and growth, and it's a non-judgmental space, so all are welcome to feel free to share their knowledge and learn without repercussion of opinions or judgment by either the presenters or other participants. We ask this be our agreement as we move through the training. And we have a pretty small group today, and we put this learning disclaimer up there because some of the topics that we're going to be talking about may feel uncomfortable for some folks, or maybe completely new to other people who are beginning to dive into anti-oppression work. And so, we want to make space for all of it and know that there's no dumb questions. If you're worried that your question may be may cause harm because you don't know how to word it, you're free to private message myself or Erica when she gets on, and we can ask it for you. So just a note about that, please ask questions. That's what we're here to do and to learn. So our objectives today are to learn the definitions of cultural competency and understand the differences between cultural competency, reflexivity, and cultural humility, to demonstrate knowledge of practical skills and methods to implement in your agency or your everyday practice, and to identify ways of reaching out to culturally relevant organizations to assist in advocacy. So we'll start with, what is cultural competence? Cultural competence is the ability to understand, communicate with, and effectively interact with people across cultures. Cultural competence encompasses being aware of one's own worldview, developing positive attitudes towards cultural differences, gaining knowledge of different cultural practices and worldviews, and developing skills for communication and interaction across cultures. Intersectionality is the interconnected nature of social categorizations such as race, class, and gender as they apply to a given individual or group, regarded as creating overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. The term intersectionality was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, an attorney. So Erica's here. I don't know, Erica, if you want to introduce yourself real quick.
Good morning, everyone. I am Erica Blackwood. I am the Study Specialist for NC CASA, and I use she, her pronouns.
Awesome. So on this slide, are folks familiar with these terms, or are these new terms? Where are we at? And you can put your answer in the chat or unmute yourself. Some folks might be typing, so if you are, we can come back to it. But I know that both of these terms are definitely kind of, I would say, buzzwords these days. You know, a lot of people talk about being culturally competent. The word intersectionality is thrown around a lot. And so we just want to make sure folks have a good understanding of what that is. And so being familiar with the terms is key in understanding where to start your work in serving marginalized survivors. I'll give the example that Black trans women are the most marginalized. They're at the highest risk for many types of violence, including sexual and domestic violence. And the most obvious reason for this is that they hold multiple intersecting marginalized identities. You know, racially marginalized, transphobic ideas that exist in our communities, in our culture, and gender-based violence and discrimination. So if we place this group at the center of our anti-sexual violence work, we're centering the needs of people of color, women, and trans folks, which will in turn help us serve more people overall. If we're not aware of where we or our agency is at in terms of our understanding of this, though, we could inadvertently end up causing more harm. So we want to make sure that folks are prepared before diving into that cultural competence work. And I'll turn it over to Erica.
Thank you, Leah. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you, Alexandra. So what's the difference in these terms? So cultural competence implies that are learning about another person's culture rather than reflecting on your own background. Reflexivity implies that one should explore their own personal beliefs in order to be more aware of potential judgments that can occur. And cultural humility is the practice of being sensitive to the historic realities like legacies of violence and oppression against certain groups of people, and it requires historical awareness. All three are necessary, but in this training here, we want you to kind of focus on cultural humility. Next slide. Okay, so what does this look like in practice? I am going to ask each of you to place into the chat whether you are a chocolate cake person or whether you are a cookie person. If you're both, that's fine, but for this exercise, I want you to pick one. Let's see. All right.
I am all alone with my cake, and that's fine.
Okay. And with that, we will use that as an example because I am also a cookie person. So all of my cookie people, imagine you have a bakery and you are making cookies, all kinds of delicious cookies, red velvet cookies, cheesecake cookies, macadamia nut cookies. You are the expert. You are the community expert on cookies. And someone comes in and says that they would like chocolate cake. How do you serve someone who has come into your agency and they would like chocolate cake?
Feel free to unmute or put in the chat, but we'd love for
Yeah.
this to be interactive.
Yeah, and we'd love to hear your voices. Put your voices into the space. That's goodness. Oh, let's see what we got here. Hannah says, maybe refer them to your favorite chocolate cake baker. Okay. Other folks. Your cookie place, how do you serve a person who has requested a fluffy, delicious chocolate cake? Felicia says, find a good cake cookbook. Mm-hmm.
Study up. How do you make a chocolate cake?
Yeah. And let's take Felicia's example. Okay, Felicia, you have found a good cake cookbook, and it is requesting some ingredients that right now your bakery doesn't have. What do you do? Research, research, yes. Yes, yes, yes.
And then maybe after you do the research, you might realize that you don't have all the ingredients to make a chocolate cake. So you have to go out and get those ingredients. So another question we
Go ahead,
can
Lee.
pose is, if you, so you do your research and you're like, okay, I think I can make a good chocolate cake, but, and I have most of the ingredients, but I don't have all of them. And I don't have all the tools, but like I could put a half decent piece of chocolate cake out there. What would the response from your community be if you're like making cake, but it's like not great cake? I see you, Felicia.
It's just easier at this point to speak. I'm
Yes.
thinking at this point, Hannah was on cue with finding that baker. Maybe we need that baker to come in. Maybe we need to go study with the baker. But being open-minded to feedback, positive or negative, and fixing or adapting or doing whatever we need to do to make that good cake, so that we can provide a good service in our bakery.
Absolutely. Because you want your people who receive the cake to be as happy as the people who receive your cookies. And what if, here I'm throwing out lots of curveballs. What if there is no baker in your area? So you have to do this all on your own, but you also have to make the cake as good as the cookies. How do you do that?
A lot of practice.
Practice. And what else? Collaborate with a cake baker in another area who can teach. And here's what I was looking for. Ask the people, right? When you had cake, what made it so delicious? What can I do here that can help this cake taste as good as you would like it to be? Ask the people. Somebody says, oh, I know, when I have a really good chocolate cake, somebody puts chocolate chips in it. That was easy, right? Because you already have chocolate chips because you're a cookie place. But sometimes just even asking the people, what is it that makes a cake good for you?
And this hasn't come up yet, but we've done this training before, and people sometimes bring this up of what if the chocolate cake people come and like you're really busy and you're really stressed because you're making so many cookies and you don't have time to learn how to make a chocolate cake right now. So they either have a bad experience or you turn them away and just say like, oh, I don't have any chocolate cake. I'm sorry. All we do is cookies. What's the impact of that in your community on your bakery?
Yeah.
At that point, I think you need to refer them somewhere so that you can still try to meet their needs, but knowing that you have a hole in your service that needs to be filled and corrected. So this constant feedback is how you grow and improve and create that chocolate cake that everybody wants.
Yeah. And if you have someone who you turn away, then they might go back to their family and their friends who are also chocolate cake people and say like, well, they can't do anything for us there. They only do cookies. And, you know, especially in a small town and there aren't a lot of bakeries, that's going to get around, right? People are going to start talking and be like, oh, don't go there if you want cake because they don't have it. Hannah says you aren't serving the whole community, upsetting them, maybe bringing on a community member. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love that, Hannah. Absolutely.
So why are we talking about cake and cookies? And how does this relate to cultural competency and to the presentation?
We're in a rural area, so this is a big issue for us. We serve a lot of different cultures, and we have to be mindful and aware of the needs of those around us. So we try to, as a staff, culturally match what we see. And then we talk a lot with each other and give each other feedback. There's open conversation here at all times to make sure that we are meeting the needs of those in our area. It would be very easy to, I wouldn't say overlook, but not understand where some people are coming from. So we're constantly reaching out and trying to get that feedback and making sure that we are connecting and getting in the areas that we need to be.
Yeah, great. Thank you for sharing that. I don't know if Courtney or Jordan have anything to add. It's a small group today, so it's easy to call on folks.
I'm at least thinking about how we wouldn't want to put the burden on the people who like chocolate cake to tell us how to make a chocolate cake. And so when you're looking at that in practice, like especially with cultural competency, you aren't asking the people who are underserved, you're educating yourself, but then asking for input of like, how could we better serve you?
Awesome, Hannah. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Just finding that balance between following the lead of the people in your community who you realize there's a gap in service for, and listening to their feedback, making sure that they have space to share and that they're being heard without saying, um, without asking them to necessarily teach you everything you need to know. Um, and because people from just like one person from one community doesn't have all the answers for everyone in that community, right? So you have to ensure that you're getting feedback from a lot of different people. Um, and so, you know, we chose to kind of start with this exercise around cake and cookies because people can feel uncomfortable talking about um, race or gender identity or sexual identity or um, people who are like non-English speaking or immigrants, people, you know, it can be uncomfortable, and because we all want to do good and we don't want to cause harm or say the wrong thing. So that's why we started with this example, to just kind of break the ice, make people feel more comfortable and open to the conversation. But it, to model like in your community, it can be difficult to have these conversations, especially when you have community partners who aren't where you're at, when you're wanting to make more progress in serving marginalized communities or finding gaps in your service. And so being able to practice having conversations with those community members is also really important. Um, so the rest of this presentation will be a little more explicit, talking about anti-oppression and anti-racism, but we wanted to go ahead and just start with this example to get people thinking. So I guess we can move on to the next slide unless folks have any questions up to this point. So we wanted to give folks an opportunity to kind of share or think about who are the culturally relevant groups or organizations in your community. I'm picking on you, Felicia, because you've been brave enough to talk. So when you think about that question, what comes to mind? Oh, you're muted.
I go straight to our stats, and I'm not sure if that's where you're headed with this, but we kind of have a mix between white, Black, Hispanic in our area. And so that's what we try to have on our staff, and locals in the counties where we're covering. So just to keep ears open as much as we can. We work with a lot of organizations, between professional organizations and church groups. We try to get grassroots as much as we can, but also recognizing that we have clients or guests who are coming into our shelter with co-occurring disorders, and we do need professional help quite frequently. So we just try to stay open and build as many bridges as we can, and keep those relationships healthy and working.
Great, thank you. I know in rural communities, it can feel like it's really hard to find culturally specific organizations to work with. And I know a lot of rural communities kind of turn to churches or spiritual centers to work with those groups if they have like a church that has a large population of a group that you're trying to serve. Like that may be a good relationship and way into supporting those folks. So thank you for sharing that. And so when we come down here to what does a mutually supportive relationship look like or sound like, um, we have some handouts that we will share with this PowerPoint for you to have about reaching out to culturally specific organizations and groups. And I think something that we really want folks to think about is I know a lot of times we may reach out to these folks and ask them, like, do you want to come to a tabling event, or do you have brochures or things that you can give to us to share with our clients? And that's good. But also, what can you do for them and how can you support them is also a piece of that puzzle. If they're doing a fundraiser, can your organization advertise that? Can you bring volunteers to them? If they're doing an event, do some of your staff volunteer at the event? Those kinds of things can also just help contribute to building that relationship. And especially when we're talking about working with marginalized groups, like maybe it's an LGBTQ center, they may not necessarily feel safe or comfortable coming to your organization depending on where it's located. If there's like law enforcement that's stationed at your center, because I know some RCCs are in like an FJC model. So it may be that some people don't feel safe or comfortable coming to your agency. And so if you're able to provide support to them instead of asking them to do things for you all the time, that's kind of what that mutually supportive relationship looks like and can be really helpful in showing them like, hey, we're here for you. We don't just want to keep taking your emotional energy and emotional labor and physical labor. So that's something for folks to think about if you notice like, oh, we're always reaching out for them to them for something, but it doesn't go both ways. Any questions or examples about any of that? Okay, we can move on.
Okay, so now it's time to do some heavy lifting. We're going to talk about anti-racism and anti-oppression, and towards the end of this, Leah will talk with you all about how to work out a plan for actually doing this heavy work. Next slide, please. So let's talk about what it means to be anti-racist. Anti-racism is the act of opposing racism or white supremacy in all forms, both in our societies, in our institutions, other people, and even the racism that exists within yourself and the ways that you perpetuate racism with your behaviors. So being anti-racist is the result of a conscious decision to make frequent, consistent, and equitable choices every day. These choices require ongoing self-awareness, self-reflection as we move through life. And in the absence of making anti-racist choices, we unconsciously uphold aspects of white supremacy, white dominant culture, and unequal institutions of society. So being anti-racist is not about who you are, it is about what you do. Next slide, please. So what are some principles of anti-racism? You want to prioritize anti-racism work by dedicating time and resources to it. Investigate where there are racial inequities in areas where you hold power. Meaningfully involve people of color in decision making. Counteract racism by taking positive action or other targeted approaches to redress racial inequity. And use your power to make measurable progress towards racial equity. Next slide, please. So let's talk about trying to put that in action. How do you put that in action, right? Next slide. So first thing you want to do in terms of your organization and what you do at your agency, you want to assess your organization's current policies and structures. Before you can create an anti-racism plan, you first need to determine whether your organization has any policies or practices that are already in place regarding this. And if so, how are they being implemented? An example could be your dress policy. Does it say anything about hair or anything related to dress that could isolate some other group? And then from there, you can assess your current resource allocations, as well as examine buy-in from the board, from your staff, from volunteers, and from other stakeholders. So first, what do you currently do regarding anti-racism or oppression work? You could place your responses in the chat if you all want to share with me one thing that you are already tangibly doing at your organization that is anti-racist or anti-oppressive work. Or you can unmute, whichever is better for you. And some of you are probably typing. If you are, please continue. I will move forward. And if I see some things in the chat, I'll come back to it. Thank you, Alexandra. So, second, staff input, survey or focus groups. It is important to hear the voices of those who are already in your organization. You should not create an anti-racism or anti-oppression plan without hearing about their voices. Oh, Jordan put something in the chat. Participating in webinars like these. We also have a book club where we read books on these topics, and specifically by authors with different identities. I love that. I love a book club. I love that, because that is that research portion that we're talking about, right? And so the second part of this is going to be to have staff input or have survey or focus groups. If you have staff of color, it's important to lift up their voices in trying to figure out how to create your plan or what you're going to do. in terms of your anti-racism or anti-oppression plan. You definitely should not create a plan without hearing the voices and concerns. And if you don't have people of color on staff, the survey focus group for your community, it's important still to hear from those voices in your community. Next slide, Alexandra. And so when creating your core values, you want to use your team members to brainstorm. And then you want to let your mission begin to define what your values are going to be. But if you have not updated your mission statement in years, you might want to do that first. Mission statements should evolve. And ask yourself some of the important questions. The one thing that we usually go back to in this work is, what is your why? Why? Why do you want to do this work? Why do you feel that's important, right? And incorporating that into your mission statement. Okay. Next slide. And so then we want to be specific, but use more than one word. Meaning, don't just say honesty. What is it about honesty that makes it a core value at your organization, or that your organization aims for? Don't just say anti-racist. Don't just throw that word into your mission statement. What does it actually mean? What does it actually mean to be doing the work? Why is it important to make that a core value of what you all do? You want to address internal and external goals. So allow staff comments and client comments to be part of this journey. If you have an evaluation, maybe putting a sentence about that in the evaluation, right? If you have client evaluations of how the service went, or things like that, you might want to throw that into the evaluation too, asking what their opinions are about the goals of the organization, because ultimately the organization is there to service the community. So it's important to lift up the community voices as well. You want to make your values unique and relevant to your organization and to your community, right? So that's just as important. Felicia mentioned that her community is made up of mostly Black, white, and Hispanic people. So we want to make your values unique to your community, right? And anyone else. We have communities who are in North Carolina who are tribal, right? So we want to make sure that we are lifting up the values and meanings that are important to that community when we service them. And so, next slide, please. Now we'll turn it over to Leah.
Awesome. So for this section, we're going to be talking about creating agency commitment goals. And we're going to lay out SMART goals and give you all time to think about what kind of goals might your agency put into practice. Next slide. So if folks aren't familiar, SMART goal is an acronym for goals that are specific, measurable, attainable, or achievable, relevant, and timely. Next slide. So a specific goal is detailed. It says exactly what you want. It's not hire more people of color. That's really broad, and it doesn't exactly tell you how you're going to do that. So maybe your goal is review and update your hiring practices. That's specific. It tells you exactly what you're doing. And so you want to be able to measure that goal, the M for measure. How will you know when your hiring practices have been reviewed and updated? You'll have changes by a certain time. So you're going to set a deadline for when you want to have that accomplished and how you're going to measure that that's getting done. And you may measure that also by how many times you're meeting to talk about it. And And they also need to be achievable. So, you know, your agency, if your goal is to meet once a week for an hour, that probably won't happen because of the nature of our work. We're all really busy running around wearing multiple hats. But once a month for 45 minutes, that may be more doable. Relevant, how does this goal connect to your overall mission? If your mission is to ensure equity in the workplace, having hiring practices that reflect that is relevant. So that's how it relates to that. And timely, it needs to be something you set a deadline for and have a plan of action. If we don't do that, of course, sometimes things just kind of fall by the wayside or get lost in the shuffle, and we're like, oh, we'll do it later, and then we never do it. And think about what you will do if you don't reach that deadline, because things do happen and people get sidetracked or new projects come up that may take priority. So think about a plan if you start to realize you're not going to meet your deadline, and how your organization work through that and adapt. Will you meet to come up with a new plan, a new strategy? So next slide. So for this, we just want to give folks about 2 minutes to think about a SMART goal for your organization. And we'll put the acronym back up there if that will be helpful. But we're going to give you 2 minutes to just think about and write down what a SMART goal for your organization may be. And then we were going to do breakout rooms, and we still can. It'll just be 3 of you. It'll be a small group for y'all to get together and share the goals that you came up with. And maybe from one another, you will think of some goals that you didn't think of that are attainable for your agency. So just take out a pen and a piece of paper or computer, and what is one SMART goal that you can think of for your agency? Okay. If folks didn't have enough time to finish, that's no big deal. We're going to put you in breakout rooms so that y'all have time to talk and share with one another for, let's say, 6 minutes. And then we'll come back and we can discuss together what kind of goals y'all came up with. So okay. So what did folks come up with? If you, Felicia or Jordan, if you want to share what goals y'all discussed.
So two things that we need to do, we know as an organization, is to increase community awareness of our services. We're in 2 counties and we have a really good footprint in one, but the other one we could do better. So that is one thing we need to do, but also increasing victims' awareness of resources in their area, especially since we are so rural and there are so few resources. The ones that are out there, we need to make sure people know that they do have resources that they can tap if they need assistance.
Awesome. And did you come up with like any sort of a first step to making that happen?
I'll start with community awareness, just outreach events. That's a great way. You know, we have billboards and things like that and brochures that we put at community colleges too. The one thing with this goal that I wasn't so sure about is how to measure it.
Mhm.
But Jordan mentioned just being at events increases awareness. So, and we do track those and try to be as present as we can in any kind of community events, large or small.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I was on a call with another advocate in a rural county yesterday, and they also serve 2 counties, and they were saying um, something they did when they first started was they went to like every community meeting. So like that could be your specific goal is like I don't know what your community looks like, so this may not actually be a thing, but in theory, like go to 3 community meetings a week. And so like that's very specific. And if it feels doable and I think one way to measure it is by um if you start getting referrals from those community partners because you're showing up more, like that's a way to measure that you're doing that community outreach well because you're getting more referrals from places maybe you haven't gotten them before. And being like invited back is a good way to measure. It's relevant to that goal of increasing awareness and timely, that can just be by next year, this time, we will have X amount more referrals from these community partners. So those are some ways to look at that. I think that's great. Jordan, did you want to share anything?
I was actually typing something, but I'll go ahead and talk. So for increasing awareness for community resources, we have a living document that any staff member can add to or edit, which really comes in handy for tracking community resources, especially during case management. So we can add, like, even if a client doesn't want to participate in case management, it's this document, we can just print it out and give it to them. It has all the phone numbers, or we can email it to them because it has hyperlinks on it as well. So that really helps for community resources. for Felicia's goal, sorry. For my goal, I feel like I want to be able to serve clients of color more efficiently, like, because I'm also in a very rural area of Western North Carolina. And like specifically in my mind, I was thinking of a client who has experienced a lot of medical racism, especially in our county. And so a goal of mine, I feel like, is to have access to other hospitals or medical staff in bigger areas that, might have more people of color. And but I don't really know how to like measure that as well, or, I don't know if that's more of like a funding thing because we can't really transport people across counties. So should we have like MOUs with other agencies in other counties? Like that's kind of where my mind was going for the SMART goal.
Yeah. I don't know, Erica, do you want to jump in?
Yeah. So MOUs with travel things as well. If there are Uber drivers in your area who could be willing to volunteer a time or two for that, that would be a way to alleviate that transportation piece. There's always a big deficit when it comes to people of color and receiving quality medical care. So that would be a big goal for you or for your agency to take on.
Yeah.
And I say definitely start small, but think outside the box, right? So even if it's just, a couple people who drive Uber, if you can, see if they would be willing to donate some time, if they'd like to drive clients across county. But also you guys have to be aware of whatever liability issues are within that, and maybe having, talking with the client and being really transparent that, this is a transportation service that is outside of our agency. And so should anything happens, the agency can't be liable, but the liability would have to lie with whoever you rode with. And just knowing that, go ahead.
Sorry. I was going to say, do you think having clients sign a waiver before even stepping foot into someone's car would be a good idea? Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure they would be, people are willing, right? Because not only is it solving an issue that they're having in terms of getting to other culturally relevant doctors in another county, but it also shows that you all are at least trying, right? And not saying that, it shows that you all are also trying to be cake people and not just saying, I need to refer you to someone else that does cake.
Yeah.
Right. So talking with your client, being really transparent. We talk about being able to think outside the box and talk with our clients and being really transparent about our services. That goes across the board, right? And it's not just the kind of cookie cutter script that we say to clients. Sometimes it's really just getting down in the mud with them and trying to think, well, what other options do we have for this thing? Yes, in terms of having culturally specific doctors and medical staff in your area, yes, that is probably money and grants and things that you or your advocates don't necessarily have ready access to. However, there are so many grants and things out there right now that are asking, begging really for people to come to them with culturally specific things and things to help serve marginalized communities. And I can think of at least one right now. I'll get you the information though.
That would be
But
awesome.
yeah, that's the other thing is to, when you have ideas like that, and when you know there's a service gap for culturally specific communities, see what grants are available, because there's lots of money out there for underserved populations and populations with intersections and things like that. And so there are things that can help. And even if it's not that you're using the money to get a medical staff or fund a culturally specific medical staff person, even if you're using those funds to do the transportation piece, right? So you're still solving a problem for underserved populations.
Okay, great, thank you.
I would also say, Jordan, you're at Oasis, right?
Yes.
I was talking to someone who was telling me that your medical staff is all like
Contracted employees.
from out of other counties, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that that's like really interesting, and I'm sure it makes it difficult to kind of build relationships. But one thing that I thought about is like something you could do in your own community, I guess, is figure out who are the medical providers, and like even outside of the hospital, like PCPs, dentists, other medical providers, and get to know them and figure out who are the culturally competent providers, even if they are, not part of the same community, or even if they're white, like perhaps they have some training in cultural competency, or if they don't, maybe it's something that they're interested in, that you could get them connected to a training resource so that they could become culturally competent. So that might also be like the specific is like reaching out to medical providers, building relationships with them, and figuring out like who are the culturally competent providers or the ones who are interested, and having some training on that. And perhaps the grant money could be used for y'all to like host a training
Okay.
to provide culturally competent training to medical providers in your area that are interested in that.
Okay. Yeah, that would be awesome. We're already in the midst of trying to build relationships with people just to get them to call us when there's been an assault. So we obviously can just add that into our list of things to do.
I'm sure it's a long list.
Yes. Thank you.
Awesome. We can stop sharing, Alexandra. So that's pretty much the presentation. I hope that it was helpful. And, like Jordan was just alluding to, this is a really big topic. And like Erica was saying, there's a lot of grants out there right now that are very much like focused on providing grants specific to serving marginalized communities or providing culturally relevant services. And we know that y'all are hearing that a lot. So we really wanted to be able to provide at least like a brief overview of what that means, and let you know that the door is open to have more conversations. So as you're having these grants, if you're struggling with what to do or what to write, you're more than welcome to reach out to us and we can support you. Are there any questions before we end? I know we're going to be ending early, but hopefully people enjoy that. Okay, well, we can wrap it up. This is recorded and we will send out the PowerPoint as well as some additional resources we've put together. And if anyone has any questions, let us know. Are you thumbs up being Jordan because you're glad you're getting the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry.
No, you're fine. I just wanted to make sure.
Mhm.
Okay, great. Everyone enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye, everybody.